Um, I understand we have a bill introduction. Senator Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate this this late session introduction. This would be RS number 1839. I'm calling it the Healthcare Individual Rights Affirmation Act. I did not want to muddy up another bill that has a similar subject, but this expands it. Basically, what it does is it allows the individual to make the right to refuse to wear a mask, and the individual shall not be refused access to a place accessible to the general public because of their decision to wear a mask. Individual shall not be denied housing or refused access to a place accessible to the general public in any way, separated from the general public because of a person's decision to receive or not receive a vaccination. And it also allows a physician to prescribe a federal FDA approved drug for off-label use. The aim of this is, you know, in the COVID situation, we knew that there was hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin available. And this kind of opens up to allows doctors to prescribe those medicines, and it does exclude any controlled substances as defined in KSA 655701. And it also provides immunity from a physician with a number of things to provide them liability from any damages if they, after consultation with the patient, and the patient decides to take that medicine, it relieves the physician from any liability. So with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you. Committee, are there any objections to introducing this bill? Any questions on the bill? Seeing none, the bill will be introduced. Thank you very much. I'm looking for the proponent. He's not here. We're going to change the order here. We're waiting for a proponent. We're going to go to House Bill 2339. And Jason, could you give us a briefing on House Bill 2339, please?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, House Bill 2339 amends one statute in the election laws 25-2423. This statute provides the crime of election tampering. The statute currently makes it a crime to make or change any record while having no election duties. The bill would change that to provide that it would be making or changing any election record unless the person is lawfully carrying out an election duty. And they would also add the following elements to the crime: changing, attempting to change, altering, destroying, or concealing any vote that is cast by a ballot, voting machine, or computer. Also changing or attempting to change any vote by manipulation of a voting machine, computer hardware, software, wireless or cellular transmission, or vote tabulation method. And also intentionally producing false voting records, vote totals, would be considered the crime of election tampering. The penalty remains the same under House Bill 2339. It would be a severity level 7 non-person felony. The bill would go into effect on July 1st if enacted, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Are there any questions to the revisor? Seeing none, thank you very much. Our first proponent is Representative Toppiger. Welcome to the committee again.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. Revisor Long explained it. It's a short bill. It's probably 20 lines long. And if you have it in front of you, it's pretty easy to see the whole bill on just one page, but you can see what we did. We worked it in committee. I'm on the House Elections Committee, and we went through it quite a bit, and we added in that we added in the word destroy, like change, alter, destroy. So destroying a ballot would be specifically what that word would be in the bill, and we added in election machine too, so that we thought we had everything covered in here. We also added in wireless or cellular transmission because in doing research across the country, we found out that that there are manufacturers of the election machines that do specifically provide that they can connect to the internet, and also those can be sent wirelessly. Results can be sent wirelessly to secretaries of state in the different states. Not all of them do it, but they can do it. And so I also brought with me an article from last year in January, before any of the controversy about election fraud. Well, I mean, over the years, there's been a lot of controversy about possible election fraud, but with all the machines. But this article, and I can get you all copies if you want, was written January 10th, so 11 months or so before the presidential election, and there was research done by, I believe this was an article by, I think I already said, NBC News, and I can get it to you, but it's an in-depth article about how election machine manufacturers have said that, yes, they do make the machines so that they will connect to the internet, and that AT&T and Verizon try to protect the transmissions as best as they can, but there can still be security holes and allow hackers to get into the phone network. So those are quotes by the by AT&T and Verizon, and I can get you all this, but
We have the copy here, and we'll get that to them. We'll get that to the committee.
and so to wrap up, just explaining this bill, Mr. Chairman, these changes, I think, could help with voter trust and confidence in the integrity and security and sanctity of the entire election system. And I would stand for questions.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions? Yes, Senator Reichman.
Thank you, Mr. Leader. Thank you for this bill. I know this last election, I was very concerned. A lot of different states seem to be a lot of irregularities, to say it nicely. Do we have much of a problem here in Kansas? Are you aware? Thank you.
I think that Secretary of State Schwab mentioned early on after the November election that he didn't see any major problems with our election in Kansas. So, but you know, when it comes to crime, you always want to get ahead of that, get ahead of anything that might happen, and put the deterrence in law. So I think that's what this bill does.
Okay. Thank you. Senator Ware.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Of course, we want to have our elections as squeaky clean as we can possibly manage. I have a little bit of a concern about some unintended things, like anybody who's changing or attempting to change, alter, destroy, or conceal any vote cast by paper ballot, the paper ballot in particular is my concern. What if the voter themselves were just wanting to keep their vote private and concealed it until they got across the room to the person that, they hand it to? That sort of thing.
Yes.
I mean, I realize that probably nobody would threaten
Yes,
to arrest someone, but
Yeah, that question did come up in the House committee, and the answer to it is that this deals with crime. So a voter just filling out their own ballot and then concealing their ballot, of course, that would be totally legal and probably expected. And so there would be no criminal intention in anything like that. So that really wouldn't apply to what this bill intends to do, because this just expands the definition of what election tampering is. So
right, I understand that that's not the intention, but the words leave that as a possibility, I'm afraid.
that would be awfully hard, I would think, to prove in court that someone filled out their own ballot and then concealed it until they delivered it. I don't know why anybody would go after someone for concealing their own ballot, but
Exactly, it would be an odd, random little incident, but but those words do leave it open for that.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
thanks.
We have a neutral from Mr. David Hamlet of Loud Light Civic Action. And Davis, are you on the line?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
All right. Thank you, Chairman Alley and members of the committee. This bill, I gave testimony in the House, and I still have some of the same concerns. I do want to commend Representative Toplicker. I think did improve the bill whenever they amended it in committee. But one of the concerns is exactly what Senator Ware was raising. Again, the language is written so broad, and we know how contentious elections are, that if someone really wanted to just throw a fit and drag out elections, if they could attempt to say that these voters were concealing their ballots, and so, for example, you should throw out all the results at this polling place because they have a picture of voters concealing their ballots. It's just important to be really careful with what is possible in the law, because we know, especially from this last election, that lots of litigation can go on in high stakes races. The other thing that I have a concern about and continue to have a concern about is what is election duty, and does it apply to the voter as they're casting their ballot? This was discussed in the House, and I don't really feel like there was a conclusion. And the reason I think this is important is because this appears to prevent a voter from spoiling their ballot. And that would be, say you go in and you make a mistake on your ballot and you want to spoil it and get a new ballot. So you would go to the election worker and they can actually destroy that ballot and give you a new ballot. But this seems to leave open that that might be considered election tampering. And then another thing would be they actually on the House floor removed in section 1(4), it used to say intentionally producing false results, and now it says just producing false vote totals. And my concern here is that in 2018, there was a circumstance where the Secretary of State accidentally double certified a county's election results. And then my question would be, would that person at the Secretary of State's office who essentially just clicked a button twice, would they be criminally liable for producing false vote totals? So again, I don't really have a problem with this bill. It doesn't seem to actually, I can't find anything that it would newly make illegal. A lot of the statutes appear to fall under other statutes, but there's just some concerns about unintended consequences that I would hope this committee would vet and be able to address, ideally with the advice of the revisers and Secretary of State. But thank you so much for listening to my testimony. I'm happy to stand for questions when appropriate.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions? Senator Faust-Cadell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and apologize for my tardiness testifying in another hearing. Mr. Chairman, I received a lot of emails and phone calls from individuals from my district concerned about any voting provision that's going to make it harder for them to vote. And maybe this bill isn't one of them, but my constituency 2.5 hours away, they just, when they hear these type of pieces, they reach out to me. Mr. Chairman, I just, for the record, I just got to say this, that, you know, I'm in this room every day, and I'm the only African-American person in this room every day, and so my mother, who marched with Dr. Martin Luther King and fought for voting rights, we should be making voting easier, not harder, and not confusing. So my question for David Hammond would be, so as I'm looking at just this little piece here, so explain in layman terms, so those who are listening in, so the bill would prohibit the governor from altering election law or procedures through an executive order.
Ma'am, I'm sorry, Mr. Senator, we're on the second bill, House Bill 2339. We bypassed that bill because the proponent was not here yet.
Okay, very good. Then I don't have to say it again. So, well, thank you for the record.
Thank you.
Which, Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry. Then tell me the bill number.
House, the second on your second one, House Bill 2339.
Okay, that's probably a nicer bill. Thank you.
Was there anything else, Senator? Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions? Seeing none, we'll close the hearing on House Bill 2339, and I'm going to move to Senate Bill 187 next, and that will be prohibiting internet social media terms of service that prohibit censorship of speech. And could we have a staff briefing, Jason?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Senate Bill 187 would add a new section of law to the Kansas Consumer Protection Act. The new statute would prohibit terms of service agreements that are entered into between an interactive computer service and a user that restrict, censor, or suppress information published on a social media website that is not obscene, lewd, lascivious, filthy, excessively violent, harassing, or otherwise objectionable. And so the content would have to be permitted on the social media website unless it fell into one of those categories. The bill does define an interactive computer service as any information service system or software that provides access to the internet via a computer server. And terms of service agreements are those general standard agreements that a user clicks agree to in order to access the internet through the interactive computer service. And that includes accessing social media websites and publishing and posting content on a social media website. If the terms of service agreement does violate the law by censoring information that doesn't fall into one of those specified categories, then the user has the option to report that violation to the Attorney General. The Attorney General is then required to investigate and may bring an action against the interactive computer service to either enjoin the censorship or impose a civil penalty of up to $10,000 for each violation. Additionally, Senate Bill 187 provides the user with a private cause of action in state court against the interactive computer service. The user may seek statutory damages of at least $75,000, actual damages, potentially punitive damages in certain cases, and could also seek injunctive relief to stop the censorship or suppression of their content that they posted. If the interactive computer service restores the censored information, they can do so to try and mitigate the damages claimed by the user. And the service can also limit or restrict content that can be on the social media website to only those specific subjects that are described in the terms of service agreement. The bill will go into effect on July 1st if enacted. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions? Seeing no questions, thank you very much. We'll move on to the proponents. And Senator Stephan, would you mind if I ask the representative to go first? Not at all. Thank you, because I believe she has an 11 o'clock appointment. Senator Lehan, welcome.
Thank you very much, Chair and committee. Sorry. This ain't my first rodeo, but I might act like it. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair and committee. It is a great joy to be able to be here with you this morning. I'm speaking to you today, rather, in support of SB 187. When I'm not moonlighting as a state representative, I work as the National Development Director for RCAF USA. RCAF is the largest producer-only membership organization that exclusively represents U.S. producers, independent grassroots producers. At the federal level, we're lobbyists. As the development director for RCAF, one of my chief responsibilities is that I manage all of our social media platforms. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, LinkedIn, Parler, and there's many others popping up every day. I will tell you, our liberty is under attack, especially in animal agriculture, from all areas. Whether it's Bill Gates or whether it's Facebook, animal agriculture is under attack. I have found my members to be censored in the matters of animal agriculture. For instance, if a member posts a video of a baby calf being born, or one of our members posted a video of them competing at a rodeo, it was censored as a violation of the community standards. Another instance, and probably one of the most telling for my scope, is that when we have bills that are being considered in Congress, that we will issue a call to action to our membership. Those bills, a lot of time, are deemed a violation. Encouraging participation in this governmental process should not be considered offensive. Encouraging people to call their senators, to call their representatives, should be something that I certainly appreciate when my constituents call me, and it should be something that is a fluid process. However, it feels as if the only time there's a violation is if we have a bill that would be conflicting on the agenda of the left. Rural America is facing so many challenges. The weather, Senator Reichman, you know this out west where we live. The weather, the markets. We do not need to be having our message censored on any of the social media platforms that we're trying to support our livelihood and support the backbone of really Americana. Farmers and ranchers are essential to our food supply. I think if you saw during COVID, our grocery stores were empty. Food, all of a sudden, those in the city realized that food doesn't come from the grocery store. It comes from family farms. And we simply want to be able to tell our story, and to be able to tell our story in an environment that is friendly to those on the conservative side of the aisle. I appreciate your time today. I appreciate you listening to my testimony. I will stand for questions, maybe. Otherwise, I'm going to be on the floor.
Thank you very much. I do know that you have another appointment at 11 o'clock. Are there any questions for the representative? Seeing none, thank you for being here today. And on remote, we have Laura Tarwater from the Kansas Republican Party, 1st Congressional District. Laura, are you on?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Good, great. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you so much for allowing me to testify this morning in support of Senate Bill 187. I did submit written testimony yesterday. But as Senator Alley said, I am the Kansas Republican Party's 1st Congressional District Chairwoman. And that encompasses 63 counties in western and northern Kansas. Huge district. We call it the Big First. Because there's so much geography there. And I am also the president of our local Wild West Republican Women's Club here in Dodge City, which is under the umbrella of the Kansas Federation of Republican Women. And just a couple of examples that I wanted to make here regarding this bill. Our district and our club have actually been victims of censorship through social media. We utilize these social media platforms and online video chat services a lot, basically for the reason of there is so much geography in between our counties that we serve. So we use this and we use that for event notices, meeting notices, just to distribute information, provide some education and training to our members. And so a couple of examples of that, in January, we had developed a Big First Republicans private Facebook group page. And Facebook actually went in and censored us in that they removed the ability for us to be able to comment on posts. So we could not interact with each other for about 30 days. For some reason or another, we violated community standards according to Facebook when we just were simply posting conservative political posts, videos, things like that. And then our Republican Women's Club, we do have a Twitter page, and half of our followers were removed from Twitter. And then myself, personally, I've been censored. I've had videos and posts removed from President Trump, in support of President Trump. So when we're censored on these platforms, it just restricts the ability for us to be able to engage and interact with one another. And then that's why I am a proponent for SB 187. And so with that, I'll end, and I'll be available for any questions when appropriate.
Very much, Laura. Are there any questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. And there is an old saying that we save the best for last, but proponent, Senator Mark Steffen. Mark, good to meet you.
Yes, Mark Steffen, Senator, District 34th. Thank you, Chairman and committee members. Again, I call this the social media anti-censorship bill. What we're really trying to do is create a level playing field. As you'll see through this, there's no verbiage referring to conservative views or liberal views, because the reality is, while the barrel may be pointed at people of opinions such as myself, that barrel can move and point the other direction. So my real hope is at the end of the day, at the end of this process, that this becomes a bipartisan bill. To understand the whole situation, we need a teeny bit of history of how we got here. Back in 1996, federal government passed U.S. Code 230, which is titled Protection for Private Blocking and Screening of Offensive Material. The whole goal back then was to protect these fledgling companies like Facebook and YouTube, and make sure that when somebody that they had no control over posted something horrific, that these young companies wouldn't get sued. You know, in kind of setting up this Section 230, the government says the internet and other interactive computer services offer a forum for a true diversity of political discourse. The other important part for this bill in particular, and for the nation at large, is Part C. It says protection for Good Samaritan blocking and screening of offensive material. And you know, these internet services are given the right to censor, and then it's defined, and that's the key part of this. It's defined as being obscene, lewd, lascivious, filthy, excessively violent, harassing, or otherwise objectionable. And that's the key, is through time, Facebook and those entities have learned to use the term harassing or otherwise objectionable as how they're able to do this censoring. So transition, and also real quick, in the bill, there is a state law section, excuse me, that says nothing in this section shall be construed to prevent any state from enforcing any state law that is consistent with this section, okay? So those are the two interesting parts. Segue to our bill. Our bill continues to give the internet providers, entities, the right to censor. What we do, we take it a step further in regards to the harassing or otherwise objectionable matter. We define that as not including political expression or political information. That's the key. We do that within the user agreement, which kicks in our Consumer Protection Act, which falls in that state section of Section 230. It provides remedies through the Attorney General. It provides remedy for the individual through statutory damages, and it really does ultimately level the playing field and appears to do so under intense scrutiny, circumventing any violation of Federal Code 230. Thank you. I'm available for questions.
Committee, are there any questions? Senator Reichman.
Thank you, Mr. Leader, and I'm not really quite sure how to word this, but if, let's say that Facebook said you violated whatever the reason they give, and what recourse exactly in this bill, what you could do if you feel that your rights were violated. I wish you kind of explain that to me.
Absolutely.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. We have two remedies for a violation. The first thing they can do is go to the Attorney General, who then opens an investigation and can pursue that through the court system, even impose, to gain an injunction against the behavior of Facebook, let's say, and then can also impose civil penalties. Also, the individual can go after them as well through statutory damages, punitive damages, and injunctive relief as well. So both we can go at them through the Attorney General and also individually.
Are there any other questions? Senator Stephan, would this bill deal with censorship by, say, school districts?
Could you give me an example?
A personal example, I didn't, but we invited a teacher. She had given us her school email. We invited her to a picnic. And the school bounced the email back saying that it was not proper to be sent to the school. So that is a censorship, and that has been taken care of, by the way, with the superintendent. But is that something that would be covered under this bill?
I'm not 100% sure, but I kind of doubt it. It doesn't sound like that's being transmitted via Facebook or YouTube or any of those entities, which this more specific.
Electronic media was what it is, so thank you. Are there any other questions? Yes, Senator Faust-Cadeau.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'm glad I'm on the right bill right now. Senator, so how, so the way that Facebook is, and they're allowed to take things down or so forth, how would that work in Kansas? I mean, are we addressing just social media here within Kansas, or, explain how this works with the big picture of Facebook or other social media?
And that's a great question. It really is. And that's been part of our strategy with this. And also as an interesting side note, which I can spare you or tell you. But yeah, when we wrote this bill, we sent it out across the nation because we knew that in theoretically, Kansas isn't hardly even a grain of sand to these big platforms. And so we've tried to develop this across the country, and we're having a lot of success. This is moving through lots of legislatures in different states, because we need numbers. We need media coverage of this to disseminate the information, to bear pressure on those entities to behave better. Yeah.
Is there any other questions? Yes, Senator Ware.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. So what about if it's a politically oriented post on Facebook, say, but it also does include threats of bodily harm, or implied, or suggested, or hey, go do this, or, you know, something like that, so that it kind of includes, it's not a clear cut. How does that work?
Right. Now, I think our definition covers that very well. It continues to leave in the obscene, lewd, lascivious, filthy, excessively violent. I think it leaves those in. It leaves in harassing and objectionable as well. It just defines that it does not include political expression or information. So, you know, political expression that still contained violent intent or demands, that you would still be violating the violent part of this, and would still be censorable, in my humble yet not legal opinion.
Good, I hope so. Thanks.
Any other questions? Thank you very much for attending today. Appreciate that. Okay, we have a neutral. Oops, let me see, maybe I don't. We have opponents, there we are. No neutrals. Tyler Dyers with the Director of Midwest Tech, and should be on remote. Tyler, are you on remote?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Right,
Proceed.
Thank you for allowing me to testify remotely. My name is Tyler Dyers. I'm the Executive Director for the Midwest for TechNet, and I'm here today on behalf of our organization to respectfully provide this testimony in opposition to Senate Bill 187. TechNet is the national bipartisan network of technology CEOs and senior executives promoting the growth of the innovation economy by advocating for a targeted policy agenda at the federal and 50 state level. Our membership includes dynamic American businesses ranging from startups to some of the most iconic companies on the planet, and represents about 3.5 million employees and countless customers in the fields of IT, e-commerce, the sharing gig economies, advanced energy, cybersecurity, venture capital, and finance. Our members are committed to keeping their users safe online, which is why social media companies and others review millions of pieces of content every day in order to remove harmful content that conflicts with their policies. Kansas should encourage these companies to have these content policies as they govern the removal of content showing the exploitation of children, child sexual abuse materials, bullying, harassment, gore, pornography, and endless spam. Instead, this bill creates an incentive for companies to not prohibit and remove any objectionable content in order to avoid the frivolous lawsuits that this bill would create. The result would be the rapid spread of abhorrent and illegal content that will cause real-world harm in Kansas communities and beyond. Social media companies understand that they have an obligation to remove objectionable content. Otherwise, their users will be subjected to dangers like images of child endangerment, financial scams, spam, and other nefarious links. Companies take this responsibility seriously, removing harmful content in an unbiased manner while keeping their services open to a broad range of ideas. In the overwhelming number of cases, removal of offensive content is accomplished as intended. However, the sheer volume of content, hundreds of millions of posts per day, ensures that both artificial intelligence and human reviewers at companies cannot get it right 100% of the time. Billions of transactions, after all, will inevitably lead to errors. It would be fundamentally unfair to implement such a draconian penalty for instances where code misfired or a simple mistake was made. As written, the scope of the bill would also affect many other businesses as well, such as news sites, platforms for hosting reviews and comments, business-to-business services, and education and learning platforms. Additionally, the bill runs counter to the American free speech law governing content liability on the internet, Section 230 of the Federal Communications Decency Act. Since its enactment in 1996, Section 230's two key provisions have empowered online intermediaries to remove harmful content while providing them with the same conduit immunity that commonly exists in other real-world offline contexts. For example, not holding a bookseller liable for libelous books, but rather the individual who committed the libel. Due to Section 230, American companies have the right to curate information on their service to meet the needs and expectations of their customers. Section 230 has supported innovation across the internet while also encouraging companies to be good Samaritans by allowing them to restrict access to or availability of material that the provider or user considers to be obscene, lewd, lascivious, filthy, excessively violent, harassing, or otherwise objectionable content, whether or not such material is constitutionally protected. For the reasons TechNet opposes this legislation, we thank you in advance, Mr. Chairman, again for your time and your consideration.
Thank you, Tyler. Are there any questions for Tyler? Seeing none, thank you very much. We're going to move on to next opponent is Steve Doblinko with NetChoice. Steve, are you online?
I am, Mr. Chairman.
Proceed. We can see you.
Thank you. Chairman Alley, members of the committee. I'm Steve Del Bianco. I'm the president of a national trade association called NetChoice, and our members include Amazon, Facebook, Google, and Twitter. My members are understandably very concerned about this legislation, but I'd like to explain why this bill is a bad move for Kansans and for conservatives. As a lifelong conservative, I went door to door for Richard Nixon in 1972 and Reagan in 1980, trying to find the silent majority out there of American voters. Now, at the time, you probably remember, there was no way for the silent majority to connect with each other across town or around the country. But today, when I share my conservative views on social media, I tailor the message so that it appeals to my politically moderate and independent voting friends. And that kind of reach was impossible in the era before Facebook, Google, and Twitter. So I'm alarmed that conservatives want government to regulate social media in ways that would alienate moderates and independents. And those are the voters who determine elections in most states and nationally. Mr. Chairman, I think the sponsor and you and everyone here realizes that the government cannot force a newspaper like the Wichita Eagle to carry your op-ed, which might favor the end of COVID restrictions or mask mandates. Why? It's because of the First Amendment. The First Amendment starts with the words, Congress shall make no laws. The First Amendment prohibits government from compelling people or newspapers or social media to carry speech that they don't want to display. Mr. Chairman, this has nothing to do with Section 230. Section 230 just addresses how to settle lawsuits quickly. It is the First Amendment that would bar any lawsuits for removing content that you prefer that they keep up. So how do you figure that the Kansas government can force Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube to carry speech that's against their community guidelines? I'm not a lawyer, but I did spend a lot of money with the world's largest law firm who say that this bill is prohibited by the First Amendment. And I attached their 14-page memo to my written testimony. And just yesterday, just last night, Utah Governor Spencer Cox vetoed his state's first in the country anti-censorship bill, saying, quote, it raises significant constitutional concerns. So if SB 187 will likely be enjoined and overturned on First Amendment grounds, what happens next? All you'll have done is to encourage moderators by confirming that state governments cannot violate the First Amendment. On the other hand, what if the bill survives the First Amendment challenge? What then? I'll just give you two quick examples. YouTube could be sued when, say, Church of the Resurrection activates content filters for user comments that are on the church's YouTube channel. So a pro-abortion or atheist advocate, they're not on the list of objectionable subject matter in SB 187, so they could sue to have those comments restored. Under SB 187, unscrupulous and unrelenting online marketers could sue when internet service providers and social media sites block spam messages and unwanted ads. So, Mr. Chairman, I'll close to say, well, what should conservatives do with the frustrations that we feel about how the largest social media platforms are moderating posts? My answer is to trust competition. Join social media platforms that are friendlier to posts that you might want to make about the election, about COVID lockdowns, and about cancel culture. I'm talking about social media sites like Parler, MeWe, Gab, and Rumble. They have tens of millions of followers, and they're growing fast. Those alternative platforms are a great place to stir up your base, and you would use your campaign rally rhetoric in those places. But those social media sites, those right-of-center sites, will never reach the broad base of moderate and independent voters suburban moms that are needed to win elections nationally and in swing districts. So please retain your Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube accounts, and then use your town hall tone of voice when you share content on those platforms. Mr. Chairman, if you're more interested in winning elections than fighting the culture wars, I think you should be a no on SB 187. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Steve. Questions? Senator Hildebrand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Steve, thank you for your testimony. You mentioned Parler in there. I thought that was kind of odd since Amazon cut them off of their web service and you couldn't even use it anymore. That is the precise reason why this bill is needed in the state of Kansas, because there is nothing in this bill that says you cannot kick somebody off for objectionable material or anything like that. But when I, as an individual, can look on Facebook or Twitter and see images, graphic images of our president at the current time beheaded with a knife in their person's hand and blood all over the screen, and that individual is not censored, but then our president, who tweets something out because people think it's a mean tweet, gets kicked off a platform. That is a problem, and that is an issue. So that's just my 2 cents. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, may I answer?
Yes, you may.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Senator Hildebrand. Parler, and I'm a user on Parler myself, was taken off of Amazon Web Services as a contract dispute between them and Amazon. Parler, though, Senator, is back up, alive and well. They found another company other than Amazon to host Parler's content. And Parler does moderate content because they have to try to keep their users happy. So they moderate content that goes beyond the list that's in 187. But Senator Hildebrand, I don't mean to disagree. I share your frustration that the social media platforms don't seem to be even-handed at moderating the content that they have. And my answer to that still remains. If you want to see less moderation of that kind of content, then turn to alternative social media, turn to competing platforms. And Parler is alive and well, sir. You can go there and see the content you're more comfortable with, but you better retain access to broad social media platforms that really reach the voters across the political spectrum.
Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. Appreciate that, Steve. Last opponent is Robert Callahan, Vice President of State Government Affairs, Internet Association. Robert, are you on?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Proceed.
Great. Thank you for the opportunity to testify remotely today. Thank you, committee members as well. My name is Robert Callahan. I'm with the Internet Association. Our mission is to foster innovation, promote economic growth, and empower people through the free and open internet. I would echo many of the comments already made by my colleagues from who've already spoken in opposition. We do oppose Senate Bill 187 because it would impede internet companies' ability to moderate harmful content online and expose these companies to immense liability if they continue doing so. We share the author's interest in promoting diverse online discourse. Unfortunately, Senate Bill 187 would exacerbate existing problems related to content moderation. I wanted to mention a few statistics, internet-related statistics that might be helpful for the committee to consider here. There are over 3.5 billion social media users globally. WordPress, which is an online blogging website, has over 74 million blog posts published every month. There are over 500 million tweets every single day, which is 6,000 tweets per second on average, which is almost 500,000 since I've began talking here. 300 hours of videos uploaded to YouTube every minute. 95 million photos uploaded to Instagram every day. The sheer volume of content internet platforms enabled to be shared by individuals is truly amazing. It has without question empowered more voices to be heard, more diversity of opinions, and made more info available at our fingertips than ever in human history. So, you know, to realize the full benefit of these online services, it's critical for providers to be able to set and enforce robust rules designed to protect the quality of these services and their integrity. Consumers expect platforms to enforce these standards so they can feel safe and secure both online and off. The provisions of this bill would undermine the ability of platforms to meet these expectations. The use of current rules, community standards, guidelines, content policy, et cetera, that all of the major social media platforms employ would be an unconscionable act and practice under the Kansas Consumer Protection Act. These rules allow the providers to regularly take action against spam, malware, and viruses, scams, threats and harassment, impersonation, non-consensual intimate images, and other content, regardless of illegal or legal, is harmful to the users and the services at large. So, and I think the discussion about some of the loopholes in this bill that creates with by talking about political speech and putting limitations on that, I think is an enormous loophole that does not necessarily at all mean the companies can continue to remove problematic content. You could think of a whole host of problematic content that really no one in this room would disagree with that could be under the guise of political speech, that then the companies would be required to make that calculation of whether or not we remove this speech, we're subjecting ourselves to private rights of action through litigation and civil liability through the Attorney General. Consumers will not benefit from a dynamic like this. This heavy-handed approach in this bill and the associated costs will fall most heavily on small businesses, nonprofits, libraries, schools, churches, sports leagues, and other hobbyists whose interactive forums online are included in this bill. The definition is very broad. It is not just the big platforms that I think most have been thinking about and spoken about today. So this has a very wide-ranging impact. I would also echo the clear constitutional concerns with the bill as well. But with that, I respectfully, we oppose the bill. Thank you for the time and the opportunity to testify.
Very much. Are there any questions? Seeing none, thank you very much for being here, Robert. And that, with that, we will close the hearing on Senate Bill 187. We're going to reopen the bill. I closed it because we had a conflict, but House Bill 2183. And could we have a staff briefing on that, please?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, House Bill 2183 would create a new statute as part of the election laws. The first part of this new statute would prohibit the governor from altering any election law procedures through the issuance of an executive order. The second part would prohibit the executive branch and the judicial branch from altering any state election laws except as permitted to the Secretary of State under subsection C of this new section, which leads me to the third part of the bill, which requires the Secretary of State to obtain the approval of the Legislative Coordinating Council before entering into any consent decree or other agreement in any state or federal court regarding the enforcement or alteration of any election laws or procedures. And finally, the bill would repeal 25-622. This statute currently provides that the Secretary of State may designate temporary alternative methods for the distribution of ballots in cases of war, natural or man-made disasters, equipment failures, or other emergency conditions or circumstances which make it impossible for voters in a voting area to obtain ballots as provided by law. The bill would go into effect on July 1st if enacted, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Jason. Are there any questions? Senator Faust-Cadeau.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I won't give the other commentary. I'll just ask. Jason, for those who are listening in, so in layman's term, explain prohibiting the governor from altering election laws. I mean, just explain how in a real situation that would work. And then a second question is, what other types of methods would the Secretary of State's office use to distribute ballots? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I don't know if I have an specific example of how this bill would work practically. Essentially, if circumstances arise and the governor wanted to make changes for public purposes and how elections were and how ballots were going to be delivered, or how voters were going to go to the polls and cast their ballots, and those alternative methods were not in conformance with existing election law at the time. House Bill 2183 would prohibit any such executive order. It would also prohibit any other agency under the executive branch or any court from the judicial branch from approving any alteration of those election procedures as well. It would allow the Secretary of State to enter into consent decrees or other agreements to alter those election procedures, provided that those agreements are approved by the Legislative Coordinating Council prior to entering into such agreements or decrees. In terms of your second question, I would have to refer to the Secretary of State's office as to what other methods they might have available to them in these circumstances if 25-622 were repealed.
Thank you, Jason, for that. Yes, Senator Faust-Goodell.
Mr. Chairman, I'm even more confused now, to be quite honest, and so hopefully the proponent of the legislation can clear this up of what's...
Let us proceed, and we'll see if we can't clear that up for you. We do have a couple other questions. Senator Dietrich first, and then Senator Ware.
All the time, sorry. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Jason, has the governor at any point in time, not this governor, any governor ever altered our election process that you're aware of? I'm just curious about the history.
I have not done any extensive research to look back to see if any executive orders have been issued to alter amendment election laws. I would have to look into that.
Okay, thank you. I just thought maybe you knew. Thank you.
Senator Ware.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I thought that the Secretary of State was the main person handling elections. The governor has authority to affect how elections are run?
No, the Secretary of State's office is the chief executive officer for carrying out and conducting elections in the state of Kansas. My understanding is House Bill 2183 is broadly directed towards any authority the governor might try to exercise through the governor's executive order powers that could result in the alteration of any election laws or procedures. I don't know that the governor doesn't have necessarily the authority to do so, but in exercising executive authority powers, if there is some element of an executive order that would have the effect of altering election law procedures, House Bill 2183 would prohibit that implementation.
Committee, we had earlier had Representative Blake Carpenter here, who is the first proponent of this bill, but he had to go to the floor. His testimony is written, and it's in your packet. We do have representatives from the Secretary of State's office here, and I will offer the floor to either Clay or Katie at this time. And hopefully we can maybe clear up some of the questions.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Katie Copel, Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Communications and Policy. Our office has no position on this legislation. We're not for it. We're not against it. We're not neutral. It's just, we're just here to be available if you have any questions for us today.
We'll find out if the committee has some questions.
All
Do
right.
we have questions? Are there any questions for, yes, Senator Ware.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Do you have any input on my last thought that this really isn't something that the governor can do anyway?
I don't believe I can comment on what the governor can and cannot do. I'm not an attorney. In terms of history for the Secretary of State, I can tell you that this, in our research, we have found that the Secretary of State has not utilized their emergency powers to change the way in which ballots can be detected. Our understanding is the intent of that statute, and Clay might throw something at me if I'm wrong, so if you see something, there was an instance several years ago in Wilson County where a precinct polling place was surrounded by floodwaters, which made it impossible to vote. They were able to be creative and figure it out, and that statute was passed after that situation occurred to account for situations in the future.
Senator Reichman?
Thank you, Mr. Leader. I'm just looking at Representative Blake Carpenter's, he says, the bill simply states the power to alter laws rests solely with the legislative branch. Was something done last year that was done to alter any laws that we had by the executive branch or any place else on there? Thank you.
Katie, Clay is holding his hand up back there in the back.
I'll answer that, and then I'll turn it over to him.
Yes,
How's
that'd be fine.
In Kansas, and we're only speaking for Kansas, we did not make any substantial changes to how the elections were conducted. Did we have to make slight adjustments to account for the pandemic? Yes, and that was mostly social distancing, PPE, those sorts of things. I'm going to turn it over to Clay.
Thank you. Clay? Welcome.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'm Clay Barker, the Deputy General Counsel for the Secretary of State. The reason we're neutral on this bill is because it doesn't affect anything in the Secretary of State's office directly. I believe the concern that this bill had was some things that happened in other states. To answer the question about the governor, under the Emergency Powers Act, the way it's, I believe, currently written, unless it's been modified, she had the ability to modify regulatory statutes, which is kind of a legal term. It doesn't mean all statutes, but some detailed ones. Whether that applied to elections or not, no one knows. It's never been done. So that possibility was there. The concern that happened in other states was one of three things. Either a single elected officer seemed to have unbounded discretion to change any elected law. Like in New York, they went from primarily polling places to mail based on a governor's edict, which caused concerns. The second was unclear delegation of authority. In Wisconsin, for instance, the governor, the Secretary of State, state courts, and federal courts were all issuing guidance on elections, which caused confusion. And the third issue about altering laws, again, didn't happen in Kansas. We seem to have a pretty sound system. The Supreme Court actually changed the substance of some of the laws, the timing and contents of ballots. They based that on a provision in their own constitution. The federal courts tended not to get involved in states, or if they did, the appellate level shot them down. So I believe this bill is looking at problems that happened in other states. But again, as Ms. Capal said, we don't have a position on this. It doesn't affect our office. And I don't believe any of these problems occurred in Kansas.
Yes, Senator Dietrich.
I hope I answered your
question. May I ask you a question? So the language that says the Secretary of State has to obtain the approval of the LCC before, and this is the question I have for you. How would you define before making any changes in procedures, election procedures? Would that tie back to what Katie just said? Would that be the procedure, you know, changing the way you organize yourself to go to the polling place? Would that be an election procedure that we're talking about? What do you think?
I believe the intent of that provision is to prevent the Secretary of State from a consent decree is essentially a settlement where the court is a third party. The plaintiffs sue and the Secretary of State settles it and the court is a part of it and supervises it. That process has been allegedly abused in other states where perhaps the Secretary of State was under pressure and settled quickly to get on with the election, and the legislature was saying, wait, you can't do that, you're changing our laws. I believe procedure there indicated the actual conduct of the election itself. So if there was an agreement to change deadlines and the legislature said, we set these deadlines for a reason, you can't agree to change them. That's why it's a check and balance on power there, I believe is the intent.
Man.
And again, we didn't write this, I'm just,
So I know you're neutral, but do you find this to be problematic, thinking forward? Is there an instance where it might be problematic?
I can't foretell what'll happen. I'm an attorney, but you never know what's going to happen with courts and lawsuits.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Seeing none, Clay and Katie, thank you for being here today. Thank you very much. We do have an opponent, and that is Davis Hamlet. Davis, are you still online?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I am.
Proceed.
All right. Thank you, Chairman Alley, members of the committee. Again, hopefully this is the last time y'all will see me this year. So there's a couple concerns with this. I should point out that when I believe the revisor talked about the section repealing 25.622, which is the Secretary of State's powers to make adjustments, that was actually amended out in the House committee, and so that might have been the former explanation note, because the most current version of the bill, I believe, does not have that section to repeal anymore. So that concern was addressed in the House Elections Committee, and I'm grateful for that. The only concern that remains now is really a broad separation of powers constitutional concern. And this comes down to, what does alter mean? I hate to keep on hitting this nail, but the broadness of the language offers some concerns of how it could be applied. Because as reading this, it seems to imply that that the judicial branch does not have a right to review and interpret election laws in a way that might be construed as altering them, or even it would prevent the court from striking down an election law because that could be considered altering them. So there's just a concern that this is really unconstitutional encroachment on the separation of powers of the judicial branch. Again, there's so many consequences this could potentially apply to, and this wasn't properly vetted in the House. I don't think there wasn't a lot of discussion on how broadly alter could be implied. And the other separation of power concern is on executive enforcement. Again, I'm not exactly sure how that word alter would be implied, but the Kansas Constitution clearly states that the supreme executive power of the state shall be vested in the governor, who shall be responsible for the enforcement of laws of the state. One other thing to note is that the National Voter Registration Act, the federal law passed in 1993, designates the Secretary of State as the chief election officer. And this appears to insert the state legislature essentially between the Secretary of State and some of their ability to carry out federal law designated to them. And so there's just some concerns about essentially the legislature attempting to completely block out the executive branch, the judicial branch, and insert themselves into the Secretary of State's federally designated authorities. And so those are just some concerns I wanted to raise, and I would be happy to stand for questions when appropriate. Thank you.
Davis, are there any questions? Seeing none, thank you very much for being here today. And with that, I believe that's all of our business for today, and this meeting is adjourned. Oh, wait a minute, do we have one more? Excuse me, I have to follow instructions. Tomorrow, we will have discussion and possible final action on the following bills: Senate Bill 11, Senate Bill 35, and Senate Bill 94, and then there are a host of other ones. So we will do that tomorrow. So with that, meeting is adjourned. Thank you.